Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Rill and this is actually my first YouTube video. I'm very excited about that. Today what I'm going to be doing is reading the introduction to The Greedy Queen, Eating with Victoria by Dr. Annie Gray. This is a food history book. It is actually not super easy to find. I was introduced to Dr. Gray when I watched a lecture of hers on YouTube. It's a little bit more than an hour long. It is absolutely fascinating. She's an incredible speaker, and I will link that video in the comments. This book is not particularly easy to find. I had to special order it from England. It was somewhere in the range of $50 for the paperback. So I did want to go ahead and share this with people who might not have the resources or ability to buy such a book for themselves. I do hope you enjoy it. Today we'll be reading the introduction. In July of 2015, a pair of extraordinarily large bloomers were auctioned in Wiltshire. They sold for £12,900, breaking the record for the previous pair of similarly generously proportioned underwear, which fetched £6,200 a year earlier. And the news of their sale was widely reported across the media. Embroidered with the letters V, R, and verified as genuine by the auction house. If anybody knows how one would verify such a thing, please let me know, because that would be absolutely interesting, and I would love to find out how these kind of things are done. They showed our continuing fascination with a woman who died over 100 years ago. Bloomers of similar dimensions and provenance appeared as part of an online history course run by Historic Royal Palaces in 2016. Reactions were immediate and polarized, from those who peered at them in avid curiosity, seeing them as offering a rare personal insight into a distant figure, to those who found the whole thing sordid and cried out for people to leave the poor woman alone. Her weight was her own issue, and we shouldn't be pawing over personal items in such an undignified way, even if she had given the items away as tokens of esteem, knowing that they would be treasured and kept for posterity, and, despite an initial interdiction to do so, eventually sold on. So this was the precursor to OnlyFans, right? Queen Victoria was, of course, the original wearer of the bloomers, was a complex, fascinating person whose reign was, until 2015, the longest of any British monarch, and who was head of state during some of the most formative years of British history. I would say modern British history, because British history is what at least 1,000 years at this point, quite a bit longer than just the last 180 or so, whatever it was roughly, since she was born. A long and influential life has made her one of the best known figures from the past, and over 500 books have been written about her, with countless more about her children, her palaces, her influence, and her legacy. This book is about her food. When Victoria came to the throne in 1837, she was a petite, elegant young woman with what commentators called a fine complexion, though a lamentable tendency to pose when resting with her mouth slightly open. Very few people knew anything about her personality, which was barely formed at 18 years old, and she was thrown into the maelstrom of court life with little experience of the world of politics, people outside her immediate circle, which was tiny, or fine dining. She was a party animal, eager for what she called dissipation, but equally ready to work hard. In recent years, her damaging childhood and delight in becoming queen had become better known in popular culture, mainly through films such as Young Victoria and the 2016 miniseries Victoria. There has, however, been a tendency to dwell on her personal life and her marriage to Prince Albert while neglecting her very real political significance. Although she was a constitutional monarch, she and Albert, while alive, had a great deal of influence, both officially and unofficially, through the reams of letters they sent and their personal connections with heads of state abroad. The death of Albert in 1861 plunged the Queen in her mid-40s into a Black Depression, and she mourned him for the rest of her life. I am about the same age as Victoria was when Albert passed on, and I mean, outside of my parents, I cannot imagine mourning anybody for the rest of my life, at least to the extent that she did. Like, she wore black for the rest of her life and constantly was talking about Albert. She dragged the kids in to see all of his stuff every year on his birthday and more or less tortured them in that aspect. None of them had good things to say about those particular events. So yeah, her mourning was quite extreme regarding her husband. Biographers have been inclined to refer to her as old from the 1860s onwards. No. Which she certainly was not. Thank you, Miss Annie. And it's deceptively easy to divide her life into pre and post Albert, whereas, as with anyone else, things were just not that simple. It is as a widow that she is best known, however, black-clad and growing ever larger, as she turned to food for comfort. She was, too, increasingly sedentary due to a knee injury that left her lame, and the most abiding image of her for most people for a very long time was a distant and forbidding figure in a donkey cart. Myths about Queen Victoria are plentiful, and largely unproven or taken out of context, from the not amused comment to the accusations that she slept with or even married John Brown. An image-searching Prince Albert at work is strictly for those who want to get sacked. Yeah, you probably should avoid that one. Food myths, while not as well known, are equally entrenched. She liked a boiled egg for breakfast, she ate like a bird, she had brown Windsor soup for every meal, and she preferred plain food. Most of these crumble in the face of fact, and a far more nuanced story can be told. The only one which even vaguely stands up in examination is her liking for plain foods, but even that has to be seen in the context of someone whose habitual fare involved truffles and cream. In researching this book, I did not set out to tackle every aspect of her life. I had no desire to explore the Queen's sense of humor, or her relationships with her family or her ministers, or her religion or politics or sense of social justice, or any of the other aspects which would form the basis of a conventional biography. And you will find barely a mention of a prime minister or a European crisis unless there's food involved. Nor did I want to write a book about a woman and her weight, or make any kind of judgment about nutrition and health which would project modern ideas and cod psychology back into an age with different ideas and onto a person whom none of us can ever really know. Victoria undeniably had a complicated relationship with food. She used it to assert control as a 17-year-old fighting for her individuality, and she sought solace in it when she was abruptly widowed and thrown into mental turmoil after Prince Albert's death. But exactly what she felt and how that was expressed in her eating can only ever be based on guesswork. The Victorian age was one of enormous culinary change. Many of the elements that were introduced or popularized had roots in the Georgian period, and still others took until the mid-20th century to really catch on. Things we associate with the Victorians, such as gas cookery, tinned food, raising agents, food molds, and the use of coal and cooking ranges all predated Victoria's accession in 1837, while others, such as chemical colorings, mechanization, gas cookery, again, frozen foods, refrigeration, and aspic in everything were as much features of the Edwardian period and beyond as they were of the decades before Victoria's death in 1901. Aspic. Yet it is fair to say that the way food was produced, cooked, and consumed altered significantly across the course of the 64 years she was on the throne, and that the eating habits of those living in 1901 were very different to those who were setting up home in 1837. In many ways, the Victorian period saw the birth of a modern food culture, complete with fad diets, worries about industrially produced foods, restaurant critics, and heavily styled final dishes. Every time we worry about serried ranks of cutlery marching away at the side of our plate, we are being led by the late Victorians, and when we desperately search for novelty in food while secretly craving a decent pork pie, we are echoing our 19th century ancestors. That sounds to me like something Anthony Bourdain would say, and I absolutely love it. Victoria ate, obviously, according to the norms of the times. Her food and the way she consumed it showed more continuity than change, which is hardly surprising, given that she had the power to eat the meals that she wanted, and her desires were hardly likely to go hand in hand with the latest gastronomic developments. But any meal is more than just its final form, and this book deals with where food came from, who prepared it, the kitchens it was cooked in, and the way meals worked in practice, elements which were often beyond the control of one individual. In doing so, it sheds light on Victorian food in general, for while the food of royalty only represents a tiny portion of Victorian meals, the factors which went into preparing it are indicative of a much wider context. Victoria was influenced by this wider context, adopting, eventually, the new dining styles of the era and eating new ingredients and types of cuisine. She, in turn, had an effect upon the world outside the palaces. Most of her subjects lived on or below the poverty line, so her direct impact was by necessity limited, but she provided a culinary figurehead. Her meals had to be lavish and luxurious and eaten off gold. She was queen, and one of the primary duties was to provide a focus for Britons to look up to. reports on her travels, on her dinner parties, and on her receptions filled the newspapers, and when she disappeared from public view in the 1860s, criticism was swift and severe, and included calls for her abdication. She was only a queen because her people wanted her to be queen and acted towards her in the way that defined her as queen. In return, she was expected to behave like one. This book is, therefore, a book about food and the Victorians, but seen through the life of a woman who ate a lot of one and defined the other. It is a sort of culinary biography of a person who symbolized an age. Victoria was and is a polarizing figure, many things to many people, often deeply contradictory. To some, she was a monster, but those who knew her usually adored her. To others, she was emotionally unstable and uncertain, but she could also be stubborn, willful, and decisive. She was unable to cope without a strong man to support her, but unwilling to relinquish any power and always aware of her status as queen. She was a terrible mother, but she doted on her children and did her utmost to give them the childhood she'd never had. She was clingy, she was independent. She did a lot for women, she hated feminism. She was sweet and feminine and laughed at everything. She was humorless and horrible and bullied her son. People change over the course of a lifetime, and she was all of these and more. However, as this book will show, whatever she was, and whenever she was being it, she remained all else a greedy queen. Above all else a greedy queen, excuse me. So that is the introduction. I will start on the actual chapters in the next video. I absolutely recommend checking out that particular lecture by Annie Gray. This particular introduction goes very, very slightly into the Georgian period, which predates directly Victoria's coming to the throne. And Annie Gray says in that particular lecture that the Georgian period historically is one of her absolute favorites, and I can see why. Once you know a little bit about it, it is an absolute train wreck, completely interesting and wild to read about. I got into this particular book again through that lecture. I don't remember how I came across it, but I am a bit of a reformed foodie myself. Unfortunately, I've come into some health problems that do not allow me to indulge in just anything I want like I could before, which is just life. I'm fine with it. But still, I do enjoy the history, the cooking aspect, and all of that good stuff. I do hope that you enjoy this just as much as I do, and that you join me for the rest of the book. I will see you next time. Have a wonderful day.